given both of your background in the CX industry, what would you say are the key factors in providing a frictionless experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the frictionless experience is something that everybody sort of wants to have, even if it's not what they might articulate when asking what kind of experience you want to have. But I think when we think about customer experience, we're always talking about NPS, and companies really want to know what their NPS is and how they compare to others in industries or their competitors. And I think NPS is important. This isn't to say that it's not, but I think what we're talking about today, customer effort, is really a driver of NPS. What do you think?
No, it's a great point. I mean, NPS is your net promoter score, and that is, how likely someone is to recommend your brand. And when you think about it, usually the ease of the transaction or how easy it is for someone to complete their transaction can be highly correlated with whether or not they're actually going to recommend your company. So it's measuring your customer effort, or ease, as we would call it in this webinar, is very important. And I know, Audrey, we talked about it the other day, that it seems like higher levels of effort, so a transaction that might be more difficult, is often highly correlated with customer churn, or what we like to call the NPS detractors, which are people who rate a 0 through 6 on their likelihood to recommend, which means that it's not a very good experience for them, and they are not likely to typically recommend your company. So it's interesting to see that correlation, just to see how important ease really is.
Yeah, I think, for the purposes here, when we talk about frictionless, we mean that if we were to ask you to rate the ease of your interaction or transaction, you would say it was as easy as it could be. It was as easy as I expected it to be. That means I didn't experience any problems, any friction in trying to complete the goal of my transaction. I can give you an example. I actually called a customer service line early this morning because I had a question about a product that had been shipped to me. I'm having a problem with it, and I got a voicemail. I couldn't get someone on the phone within their business hours. So they ended up calling me back, left me a voicemail. Now I'm at work, I can't answer, with a list of instructions of things that I should do to try and fix it, and then to send them pictures and receipts and all these things. But really, I just need to talk to someone. So already I haven't completed the goal of my interaction with them, and I'm already feeling the friction. So their effort score is going up as we speak.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because it's almost like the ease is now, it's turned into more than just one interaction, where, realistically, we just want it to be done in one interaction. I know a prime example of this, no pun intended, is Amazon Prime, and just how convenient Amazon is, and the fact that kind of convenience can sometimes transcend personal preference, because I know a lot of the times I personally like to shop at smaller boutiques or mom and pop shops, things like that. But just the utter convenience and speed of Amazon sometimes is really hard to pass up, especially when you're in a crunch. Like this weekend, I'm going to an engagement party and I need engagement decorations, and I was able to order it on Amazon, and it's going to be here tomorrow. And it's just, sometimes those types of things are unbeatable. And especially also, when you think about all the advancement in QR codes and being able to scan that, and no packing your items up, and you can just drop them off at a UPS or a FedEx, and you don't even have to package it up, and you get immediate refunds. I mean, things like that are hard to beat. So I think Amazon is definitely a prime example of industry or company that's really capitalized on easy transactions, for sure.
I like the prime.
I know.
Yeah, Amazon is such a good example, because they make it as easy as possible to complete your order, get it delivered when you want to get it delivered, and then if you have to return it, you don't really have to do anything. You just have to take your item to a place and drop it off. You don't have to pack it, like you mentioned. So I think what's important for companies that we work with and in general to remember is that your customers are also customers of these other businesses that are making these transactions as frictionless as possible. So your customers are getting used to these easy ways of doing business and are expecting it in their dealings with you too. So if you're sort of behind the times and are not willing to go the extra mile to make it easy, you're going to see that come out in your customer feedback scores and sentiment related to the level of effort required to do business with you. So we want to help you. We have some recommendations, some advice on how to make it as easy as possible to do business with you, and sort of how you should interact with your customers to do so. So I think we could probably jump into that now.
Let's do it.
All right. So one thing is just listening to your customers. We think that creating this frictionless experience starts with customer listening. And that means while you can design the experience that you think is great, you have to actually talk to your customers, collect feedback from them, and make sure it's meeting their needs. It's not about you, it's about them. So if this company that I had called this morning asked me about my experience, I'll be able to tell them, look, I wanted to talk to somebody when I called. And then once I called, you told me to do XYZ and then take pictures and then send things. It's way too much effort involved for the information and the outcome that I'm looking for. And that feedback should help them improve over time. So I think that's one of the biggest things is you have to make sure you're actually listening to your customers after they have these interactions with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without any of these feedback channels, as we'll call them, it's really impossible to know how an interaction might be improved. And I also think it's important to know that it's good to get the feedback about things that may not be going well, but it's also good to get feedback on things that are going really well so that oh, my customers really like this, or this has been making the experiences a lot better for them doing XYZ or greeting our customers or whatever it might be. Knowing what you're doing well too is also a part of ease and potentially increasing your net promoter score as well. So, this whole time that we're talking about customer listening, it can go both ways, negative or positive feedback. But as Audrey said, the first starting place is really kind of getting potentially a survey in place to really be able to listen to your customers. And the thing that's cool about, surveys is that you have the ability to send surveys to specific groups of people. So for instance, if you know that there are a portion of your customers that haven't returned in X amount of time, let's say 3 months, 6 months, we have the ability to be able to send a specific survey with a specific line of questions to those people to really understand maybe why they didn't come back. So with surveys, there's a lot of different capabilities to get really specific information.
Yes. And then another way of listening to customers is to form a customer advisory board where you take a subset of your high impact customers, meaning customers who have an outsized influence on your business. Maybe they have a very high customer lifetime value, or they give great referrals, or they have a long tenure with you, or there's many reasons that they might be impactful. But if you can identify them and invite them to join an advisory board, usually for about a year, where then they're available to you to ask questions that are important to your business. And you can go out at various times throughout the year in using different methodologies and listen to them, listen to their experience, listen to challenges they're having with out in the world with other companies that they do business with, listen about what they might want to see you do in the future, and then use that feedback to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think customer advisory boards are a great addition to any survey program that you have. Not only does it get you in-depth information and feedback on various items that you want to touch on. It could be anything from a product launch to a new way of doing transactions to a new company initiative, and you want to talk through with them if it makes sense or if there's any barriers to entry, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do with the customer advisory board to get that in-depth feedback, but it also just helps you kind of build more of a rapport and relationship with these customers that you have in this advisory board. Typically, I think, Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically we recommend usually one customer advisory board per quarter to kind of get a sense of their feedback. And that can be anything from one-on-one interviews or focus groups or ideation sessions, things like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can gather this feedback. So I 100% agree that advisory boards are good. The other point I wanted to make was that you also don't have to necessarily use just your customers. So the beauty with advisory boards is that you can also use a group of people that are within the same industry. So let's say The company, let's use Target, for example. You can certainly have an advisory board of Target customers. However, you can also use an advisory board of other customers that maybe Target customers, but they also shop at other places. Or you can use, people that don't shop at Target, and you want to get feedback on how interactions are going at other companies that are similar to Target. So things like that. It doesn't have to just be your particular customers. It can be other people that are within the same industry as well to gather feedback.
Yeah, definitely. And then the third point that we wanted to make here is making sure that you're closing the loop with your customers after they provide feedback to you. So it could be from any channel where you're getting customer feedback via survey, an advisory board, on social, via an email, wherever the feedback is coming from. You need to make sure you're closing the loop with your customers and saying, look, we heard you, and we're going to do the best we can to incorporate our feedback into your feedback into the way we operate. And so sometimes you might not be able to do anything, but letting the customers know that they were heard, letting them know that you're attempting to resolve any issues that they might have had come up is really important, and will help customers feel like the level of friction is diminished if, once they provide you with feedback, you say, look, we heard you and here's what we're doing about it. So in my example that I talked about earlier, if this company calls me back and says, you know what, we heard that this was really frustrating experience for you, there was too much effort involved in resolving the problem, and here's how we're going to fix that for you, that would make me feel really happy, and my effort in my mind would be diminished, because now I know moving forward I'm going to have a better experience.
Yeah, that's true. And like I said before as well, I think that closing the feedback loop can be positive or negative. And like you said, Audrey, I think oftentimes with negative feedback, just the simple act of following up and saying that we heard you, we're working on it, things like that, even if you don't actually have the capabilities to make a change that's related to their particular poor interaction. But as long as you're letting them know that they're heard and their opinion matters, their voice matters, that oftentimes, I know for me, can also kind of wash away the negative experience. And it's like, okay, at least they're listening, I'm going to give it another shot, type of thing. And as I said before too, the positive feedback I think is really important to also understand, so that you can kind of capitalize on what you're doing really well and continue to incorporate that, and continue to maybe even incorporate certain aspects into your company ethos so that it goes from one location to the next. So I think those are the three main voice of customer measurement methods that we have. But I agree with you, Audrey. I think the number one thing to kind of get started is to listen to your customers. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see what's next. Yeah. So the next thing that we recommend in trying to design and amplify a frictionless experience is to implement a secret shopper or mystery shopper program. These are where you have someone go in as if they are a customer, but they're going in with a certain goal in mind to complete some kind of interaction. It could be in a bank branch or in a store, or when they call to speak to an agent on the phone, or when they stay at a location of your resort. They're looking for certain things, they're expecting certain types of interactions with employees, and they're going to be reporting back to you on what their experience was. And this can help you gauge the ease of the interaction. You've designed an experience for your customers that you expect to happen in a certain way. Is that what's really being delivered? And this is a good way for you to sort of measure and confirm whether it is or it isn't, and then decide what to do next.
Yeah, secret or mystery shopping is like my favorite. I think it's so cool. I think that it the way I look at it is like, imagine you've been writing a paper or doing some sort of project or a report, and you've been working on it for so long, and after a while you don't see things that could potentially be wrong with it because you've been working on it for so long. Secret shopping or mystery shopping to me is like getting a fresh pair of eyes on things. And I think it's a great way to, like we have on this slide here, really gauge the ease of interactions and kind of understand where improvements can be made. And the beauty of secret shopping is that you really have the ability to determine what you want these shoppers to kind of test employees on, or stress test different interactions. So The second point here is understanding how employees interact with customers under various circumstances. That's what, stress testing would be good for. And by that, I mean, maybe try and ask one of the employees about a specific offering that you heard about, or ask them how to, open up a banking account, or things like that, just kind of to gauge whether or not the employees, how they're interacting with the customers and how they do under certain circumstances that may be different than their ordinary day-to-day interactions. And then the last one is the value testing. So that's also just, obviously ensuring that the employees are treating and assisting customers in a way that, the company ethos or the company itself would see fit. So yeah, secret shopping is definitely, I think, a really cool addition to a lot of different programs to kind of get a different point of view.
Yeah, and one more point on this slide. We know that not every experience can be frictionless. The idea is to design it in a way that will eliminate as much friction as possible. And then when it does happen, that your employees are able to deal with it with empathy. And that's on here. And I think it's so important. So maybe the friction is still there, but the way that employees handle it and show empathy to your customers will make a big difference in how your customers end up feeling when they leave. It's a key moment of truth in any customer interaction with an organization when there's friction. And if the employee is able to show empathy, it will pay off long-term with the way your customer feels about your company.
Absolutely.
All right. Yes, and then our last recommendations in dealing with creating frictionless experience is to use technology to your advantage, but don't lose out on the personal touch. Meaning, we hear omni-channel and digital and all these buzzwords now, and it makes sense to implement tech and to streamline your services, but you have to also ensure that agents are available for support. So in my case, this morning, I called and expected to talk to a person because they have a customer service line. If you don't have a customer service line, then fine, I won't expect a person to answer, but I was calling and expecting a person, which I didn't get. And so that's not a frictionless experience. You want to make sure that you're using technology to your advantage so that it's designed in a way to support your agents or your team members and how they're supporting customers, but you still have to make sure that you have real people who are knowledgeable at your company available to help customers when they need it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Implementing tech to really streamline services, but having in-person agents or support available, because, situations, things always happen, whether it's they have a question or, something doesn't go accordingly and you're like, I need a human to help me figure this situation out. So being able to kind of pivot in those types of situations, I can't count the number of times I've been to the bank and the ATM's down and I have to go in, and that's totally fine. I have to go in to get cash or whatever it might be. But, if they didn't have the people there to handle that transaction, I would not have a very easy transaction. I would not have a good experience. An example of this, there's a coffee shop that is right near where I live, and they're great in the sense that they have, the in-person hostess and they greet you and they bring the water to your table and everything. But then they have, I'm sure we're all very familiar with it at this point, but the QR code on the table, and it makes it super easy. I can order what I want, pay for it, and then as soon as I'm done eating, I just leave. I don't have to wait for a check or anything like that. So being able to kind of have that balance, I think, is really important. And I think a great way also to understand where that balance should be are things that you can ask in a survey or in a CAB, a customer advisory board. And you can ask your customers, where do you prefer to have human interaction? Do you want to have it, if you're at a bank, do you prefer to have human interaction during this part of the transaction? Do you prefer to have it on this part of the transaction? Do you prefer to have tech involved in this part of the transaction? Those are the types of questions that you can ask, the different touch points that you have with your customer. You can ask them what they would prefer, because I know depending on sometimes the generation, some people would prefer to have tech implemented in certain touch points, whereas other people would prefer to have, the in-person contact.
Especially when you're starting a new service or using a new product, it's the majority of people want to be walked through it. They don't want to be
Right.
handed a link to read instructions, and they just want to get a walkthrough and fully understand it before diving fully in. It's very important to have the balance in those things.
Well, and that's why it's so important to the second point here is to actually use the feedback that you're getting to improve your products or services. If you're going to ask, you have to make sure that you're actually listening and understanding the feedback and then using it. And the best companies, the companies who are doing this the best, are using the feedback, and then they're telling their customers, hey, this is what we heard from you. And we know that it wasn't from everybody, but we think based on all the feedback we got, this is the best decision for our company, and this is how we're going to do this moving forward. And then in cases where the process can't be changed or the company has decided to go in a new direction, it's so important to communicate whatever that is to your customers. So sometimes the answer is no, right? And we've come across that in all aspects of our lives. It's fine if the answer is no, but it has to be communicated with a reason. And then customers feel, again, that there's some empathy involved in how they're being dealt with and are much more understanding in our experience.
A large company and not follow through with this. I'll give an example. Is American Express updated their website in 2019. There's still the same issues that arose when they first launched to now. And every time I exit, I complete the survey, answer all the same issues I've answered in the previous one, noting all the issues, yet they never get resolved. Just because you're a large company doesn't necessarily mean you're running your customer experience feedback programs accurately.
Well, and that's really frustrating to me. That's worse than not asking at all. You're asking me to expel the effort and mental energy to tell you what's wrong and what my poor experiences over and over again and not doing anything about it. That's worse than me not having an avenue to provide my feedback. So you have to be careful that you're asking for feedback and using it to your advantage. You know, it is another touch point. It's another interaction that you have with your customers. And if you're not using it in the right way, it could actually be detrimental to you. It could harm the relationship rather than help it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I have seen previously customer voice of customer programs where I've seen comments from people who have taken surveys, and they literally say, you've asked me this last quarter, it's the same answer, you know. And it's true that, like, if you're not you know, actually listening and being able to make those changes, you're right, it can almost be detrimental as well. I've seen plenty of programs before where you know, they haven't been able to make the changes, and that in itself can sometimes be damaging as well if you keep asking the same questions.
Yeah, and I think this sort of speaks to our third point about making sure that you have resources available for customers if they want to self-serve on help, that the content is available, that you have a video how-to or a frequently asked questions document or something to allow your customers to get the information they want, and make sure you're setting follow-up with your customers, that where you're reaching out to them on a regular basis and saying, you know, thank you for your business, and we heard your feedback, and here's what we're doing, and regular updates. And those interactions are also really important.
And it also provides the customer with the assurance that you really care and that you're really looking for their best interest. And it also gives you as the company an opportunity to expand and let your customers or make your customers aware of services that help, but they might just not know of. So it really, there's so many good aspects to keeping a good relationship with your client.
Yeah. And I feel like an overarching theme with all of this is just communication. I think communication obviously helps to streamline interactions and improve the level of effort. And when in doubt, you know, we obviously, like we said before, no interaction is it's hard to have a perfect interaction. You know, it's people understand that not everything is going to be perfect, but having that open line of communication, I think is really kind of a make or break.
That's funny. One last point that made me think of, sometimes the perfect interactions are forgettable, and maybe that's not what you want either. You know, if it's perfect, it went so smoothly, it's done and out of my head, versus if something went wrong or it wasn't exactly right, but then I had an interaction where I was shown empathy and follow up, and that's going to be memorable to me, and is what will stick with me when I think about my interactions and feelings about a company. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's true. I think it actually is something in psychology, it's the negativity bias. And it's true that, when in doubt, sometimes humans will remember the negative experiences more so than the positive. So really going above and beyond to, like you said, show the empathy, show the communication, I think can really make a difference.
Definitely. All right. Were there any questions?
Yeah, what does a secret shopper program look like? And is it the same for each business?
I think it would say it's definitely not the same for each business, and it's really likely unique to whatever your business is, the way that we would recommend designing the program. So we would want to look at what are your in-person interactions, where are customers interacting with people, and we would start with those. Could be on the phone or in person physically, and figure out what should the experience be like, what are the most common things that customers try to do in those interactions, and then start measuring those, and then maybe look at your digital interactions and come up with some scenarios that people should be able to complete and see what that goes like. But yeah, I would say it's really to each business, so it's hard to say without talking about a specific scenario.
Yeah, I would agree. It totally depends on the line of business or the industry. I think a good, starting place is obviously, what do you envision your transactions to look like? I think it's a good starting place to think about, okay, what do you want it to look like? And then potentially if you have a survey in line, you can kind of understand what's going on so that you can see kind of what's the difference, what are we missing here? And then really capitalize on that when you do have your mystery shopper go in. So whether that's, knowledgeability, let's say that, the knowledgeability of employees on different offerings of the business are not great, then that's something that you can capitalize on in the mystery shopping to really gauge on how that has improved or maybe not improved. So I think taking a good look at, where you're at versus where you want to be is kind of a good starting place.
Well, thank you both for going through all of this. This has been a very wonderful discussion. And thank you all for joining. We'll see you next time on PeopleMetrics Live. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.